Good morning. Welcome to the July 2017 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce our agenda this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 9 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a notice of inquiry that seeks comment on methods to authenticate telephone calls to further secure our telephone networks against illegal robocallers. The notice seeks comment on implementing authentication standards for telephone calls, as well as the Commission's role in this process and other public policy considerations. Second, you will consider a notice of inquiry that explores methods by which reassigned telephone number data could be made available to callers to avoid making unwanted calls to consumers. Third, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking outlining steps to further curtail slamming and cramming. Fourth, you will consider a second further notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes rule changes to better address ongoing problems in the completion of long-distance telephone calls to rural areas. The second further notice of proposed rulemaking proposes to adopt new rule call completion requirements for covered providers and eliminate or modify the Commission's existing rule call completion recording, retention, and reporting rules. Fifth, you will consider a first reporting order that would update and amend its equipment authorization program by replacing 2 certification procedures with a new supplier's declaration of conformity process, codifying procedures for the electronic labeling of devices, modernizing the requirements related to the importation of electronic equipment, and incorporating up-to-date methods for equipment compliance measurements into the rules. Sixth, you will consider a reporting order that would address use of the 76 to 81 gigahertz band under the Part 95 rules to support a broad range of vehicular radar uses, such as collision avoidance and adaptive cruise control systems, as well as to expand the types of fixed and mobile radar operations permitted within airport environments. Seventh, you will consider an order on reconsideration and further notice of proposed rulemaking that would address licensed and unlicensed wireless microphone operations in the TV bands and various other frequency bands. Eighth, you will consider a memorandum opinion and order that addresses exceptions filed to an initial decision granting a program carriage complaint. Ninth, you will consider an enforcement action. This is your agenda for today. Please note the Media Bureau item entitled Video Description, Implementation of the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2010, and previously listed in the Commission's July 5th Sunshine Notice, has been adopted by the Commission and deleted from today's agenda. We will begin with a joint presentation of the first 2 items by the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureaus. Chris Monteith, Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, will give the introduction for item 1, entitled Call Authentication Trust Anchor, and Patrick Weber, Acting Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, will give the introduction for item 2, entitled Advanced Methods to Target and Eliminate Unlawful Robocalls.
I'm sorry, madam. I wasn't paying attention. Would you mind repeating all that? No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. Ms. Monteith, whenever you're ready, feel free to proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau presents for your consideration a notice of inquiry on call authentication and trust anchors, which begins the process of establishing technologies that enable telephone providers and their customers to accurately verify the origin of telephone calls, thereby reducing the risk of fraudulent calls, including fraudulent robocalls. I would like to thank the Competition Policy Division team for their work on this item. I also thank the Consumer and Governmental Affairs, Enforcement, International, and Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureaus, as well as the Offices of General Counsel and Strategic Planning and Policy for their contributions. Seated at the table with me are 2 members of the Wireline team, Heather Hendrickson, Acting Assistant Division Chief, and Sherwin C., Special Counsel. Sherwin will now present the item.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The notice of inquiry before you, if adopted, would seek comment on establishing a call authentication system based on a trust anchor model. Industry proposals envision a system by which telephone service providers digitally sign calls using certificates issued by qualified certification authorities to ensure that caller ID information is accurate. This way, when a call is received, they know that it actually comes from the number or the subscriber it claims to be from. The notice would ask for comment on three main topics. First, the notice would seek comment on how such a system might be governed, including the Commission's role in requiring, encouraging, or enabling a call authentication system, who or what entities should set the rules and procedures for the system, and what criteria those entities should set for who may be qualified to issue certificates or serve as an authenticating telephone service provider. Second, the notice would seek comment on the technical implementation and operation of the authentication system itself, including how the service providers or phone numbers to be authenticated should be enrolled in the system, what alternatives might exist for certain specific technical and structural proposals of the system. Third, the notice would seek comment on the scope and policy effects of a call authentication system, such as whether and how the system can address call authentication issues on legacy systems, how a U.S.-based call authentication system might integrate with the systems of other countries, and other policy effects of a call authentication system, including the effects on privacy and security. Additionally, the notice would seek comment on the potential costs and benefits of the system, including how it might be funded. The Bureau recommends the adoption of this notice of inquiry and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. This concludes the call authentication and trust anchor NOI presentation. I'll now turn it over to Patrick Weber, Acting Chief of CGB, to introduce the reassigned numbers NOI. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherwin. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Good morning. Today I'm pleased to introduce an item that addresses a long-standing robocall problem, calls to reassign numbers. Specifically, this second notice of inquiry asks for comment on creating a comprehensive resource that can be used to identify telephone numbers that have been reassigned from consumers who have consented to receiving calls to consumers who have not consented to such calls. Unwanted calls to reassign numbers can be avoided if callers have a comprehensive resource that identifies whether the consumer who consented to receive calls can still be reached at the number provided. Both consumer groups and callers support this concept because it helps callers reach people who want to hear from them and avoid calling those who don't. This second notice of inquiry provides an opportunity for interested parties to submit information on how the Commission can turn this concept into reality. I would like to thank the other bureaus and offices that helped us: the Office of General Counsel, the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Enforcement Bureau, the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. With me this morning are Kurt Schroeder, Chief of CGB's Consumer Policy Division, and Josh Zeldis and Karen Schroeder, Attorney Advisors in the division. Karen will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The second notice of inquiry before you will begin an examination of how numbering information can be used to create a comprehensive resource that businesses and other robocallers can use to identify telephone numbers that have been reassigned. Although commercial solutions aimed at providing similar information already exist, the Commission has recognized that callers lack guaranteed methods to discover all reassignments immediately after they occur. The item seeks comment on enabling callers to more quickly learn of reassignments by providing access to number reassignment information possessed by voice service providers. It asks about various ways that voice service providers could report information about number reassignments, and then how that information could be made available to benefit consumers and callers alike. First, the item seeks comment on how voice service providers could report the reassignment of phone numbers that have been allocated to them. It seeks comment on what information they should report, whether the reporting requirement should apply to all voice service providers, including wireline, wireless, and interconnected voice over Internet protocol providers, and how to treat service providers that do not obtain numbers directly from the North American Numbering Plan Administrator. Second, the item seeks comment on 4 alternatives for making the reported information available to robocallers. Under the first alternative, the Commission would establish a central database of reassigned numbers and select an administrator of that database, much as it did to facilitate local number portability. The second alternative is for each voice service provider to report reassigned number information to callers directly or to reassigned number data aggregators. Under the third alternative, each voice service provider would offer callers and data aggregators the ability to query the voice service provider's own reassigned number information. The fourth alternative is for voice service providers to make reassigned number data available directly to the public, such as by publishing it on their websites. This item also invites suggestions for other alternatives. Finally, the item seeks comment on several factors relevant to the reporting alternatives, including financial, technical, and operational issues. It also inquires about matters such as data security and consumer privacy. We recommend adoption of this item and request editorial privileges to make technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schroeder, for that presentation, as well as Mr. C. We will now hear comments from the bench for both items. After hearing comments for both items, we'll call for the vote on item number 1, which is a notice of inquiry on the call authentication trust anchor, and then a separate vote for item 2, which is a notice of inquiry for eliminating unlawful robocalls. My thanks to Commissioner O'Reilly for a suggestion to combine the two. We are all about ruthless efficiency here at the FCC. So we will start with Commissioner Clyburn.
You said ruthless efficiency, not the ruthless. I'm just getting clarified. The phone rings, Mr. Chairman. You pick it up. Then you notice a distinct pause. You sigh heavily because you know within seconds a recording will follow saying something like this. Congratulations. You have just been chosen to receive an all-expenses-paid vacation to Florida. We each have had our encounters with robocalls, and our feelings about them are really warm or fuzzy. They too often come in at the worst possible times during an important evening meeting, just when you are having a rare conversation with family members or friends, or if you're like me, right when you're about to take that next to the last bite into an already lukewarm, previously frozen television dinner. I need to work on that part. According to the latest data from the U-Mail Robocall Index, 2.5 billion of these robocalls were made just last month in the United States. Equally remarkable is that 4 telephone numbers are responsible for more than 68 million of these calls. Given the severity and complexity of the unwanted robocall problem, this agency recognizes that it must take a multi-pronged approach to address this persistent issue. Through the combined efforts of the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, we have before us 2 notices of inquiry. The first seeks comment on how to best authenticate, certify, and identify calls in an effort to eradicate unwanted and illegal robocalls for good. Proper authentication and identification are necessary first steps in stopping illegal robocalls dead in their tracks. Through an authentication regime, we can better ensure that no spoofed robocall goes undetected, untargeted, or unblocked. The second notice initiates an inquiry on how to deal with reassigned numbers. There is no denying that millions of phone numbers change hands each year. This has led to calls for establishing a reassigned number database, an undertaking that has my support. I appreciate the Chairman's willingness to include suggested questions in the item, including the downsides of a safe harbor for robocallers and how to design a reassigned number database in such a way to maximize its use and reliability. As is evidenced by recent actions taken by the FCC, including last month's notice of apparent liability against an individual alleged to have spoofed nearly 100 million calls. No one action will rid this nation of illegal robocalls for good. But support for both of these notices of inquiry affirms our commitment and willingness to work together and find new and innovative ways to make sure this commission stays one step ahead. Thanks are due to the staffs of the Wireline Competition Bureau and the thank you, Wireline Competition Bureau. See, Chris has been more than one place, so when I look at her, I get that. and CGB for your continuing efforts to stop unwanted and illegal robocalls. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And many thanks for combining the discussion of these two items, addressing similar but distinct aspects of the same topic. Overall, I appreciate the challenge of trying to corral and decrease illegal robocalls, many of which originate overseas. Do note that I said illegal robocalls, as not every robocall is problematic. In fact, many are extremely beneficial to consumers, providing information they want and expect to receive from trusted companies. The Commission's job should be to ensure that it doesn't prevent or squash legitimate robocalls in its ferocious quest to curtail unwanted ones and illegal ones. I find the second item regarding reassigned numbers to be extremely pertinent to this entire discussion. Quite frankly, I think this item shines a bright light on just how misguided and fundamentally broken the Commission's 2015 TCPA declaratory ruling really was. At that time, I begged the chairman, the then chairman, my fellow commissioners, and the staff to accept reality and address the issue of reassigned telephone numbers in a meaningful way. I was ultimately unsuccessful. Instead, the Commission tried to pretend the problem wasn't valid, despite estimates that 100,000 cell phone numbers are reassigned to new users each day, and telephone numbers are typically withheld for only 90 days or less before being recycled to new users. This meant that the scope of the problem was much larger and thornier than the Commission ever acknowledged, making any type of prior consent extremely difficult and essentially worthless in a short amount of time. Exacerbating the situation, the Commission created a faulty and intellectually dishonest solution of one free call to the consumer exemption as a fig leaf remedy. Recall that the exemption does not require consumers to actually inform the caller that the number has been reassigned, ignores the worthlessness of uninformed voicemails, and even counts call attempts or informational texts where there was no response at all as against the call policy. Moreover, accidental redials receive no protection whatsoever. In my limited time, I won't belabor how bankrupt this really is and how it has ensnared legitimate companies in needless, financially crippling litigation for the simple practice of trying to contact willing consumers. I am hopeful that the D.C. Circuit will overturn this and other portions of our previously declaratory ruling and install an intended receipt or actual knowledge standard as the proper legal test, which is completely consistent with the underlying TCPA. In addition, the Commission should initiate a new proceeding to effectuate this change. To the extent that the issue is not mooted by court action or our own initiative, the item before us explores the creation of a reassigned number database as one option to deal with the issue. The idea being that companies could cross-check their calling lists against an accurate and consistently updated database of reassigned numbers to significantly limit the number of stray calls. Well, not a new idea, as many people have in the past have proposed differing options, such as using part of the Commission's existing numbering resources. The second notice of inquiry explores many of the relevant issues that would need to be sufficiently answered before creating such a database. Chief among these is language added at my bequest that examines whether to similarly create a safe harbor for companies that use the database to minimize calls to reassign numbers. Simply put, there must be some benefit for companies to establish, pay for, and use such a database, and a properly constructed compliance safe harbor must be part of the equation if this item is to proceed forward. In the first item, pertaining to call authentication, I'm a little less sanguine. While I applaud the Chairman for creative efforts to further curtail illegal robocalls and will vote to approve since it's an NOI, I'm not exactly comfortable with some of the direction or suggestions posed. Certainly, I'm not in favor of the federal government via the Commission actively involved in these functions, either as a government authority or policy administrator, no matter how meritorious it may be for reducing unwanted robocalls. Creating, facilitating, or mandating such a regime, which seems to be close to establishing a de facto technology mandate, is not the proper role of the Commission. Those functions should be left to the private sector. Moreover, ADIS, the purveyor of the shaken framework, favors a minimalist government role or none at all. That seems to beg the question why we would contemplate anything more. To the extent that the Commission feels it must get involved, we would need to see some convincing evidence. Holding roundtables with applicable parties or letters seeking information on the potential blocks would be the best course of action. Maybe we can turn to TAC or CISRIC for that purpose. Operationally, I'm a bit puzzled how this actually structure would work in reality, given that there's already an authentication process for data packets, which exists notwithstanding the FCC or other government involvement. For data packets that contain voice, there would be some extra certification authentication structure separate from the applicable that already exists for other data packets, what I don't quite understand. In the end, the item seems to raise the most salient issue, stating, we anticipate that adopting authentication frameworks in the United States will naturally have less effect on foreign robocalling. In other words, if this item were eventually turned into final Commission rules, it is likely to have questionable impact on illegal robocalls initiated overseas. Given that most experts agree a good portion of robocalls initiate outside the boundaries of our nation, this would certainly need to be fed into the cost-benefit calculation as to whether FCC intervention is warranted as opposed to industry-led efforts. With that, I will vote to approve both of the two items. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. This is an appropriate way, I think, to begin Consumer Protection Month here at the Federal Communications Commission. Following on the heels of recent efforts by this commission to combat illegal robocalling, we are opening up two new fronts in this battle. Each of these notices of inquiry, as you have heard, examines ways to prevent unwanted and or fraudulent robocalls. The first notice of inquiry targets fraudulent robocallers, and these are the ones who continue to find ways around consumer call blocking or filtering tools by using inaccurate caller ID information. For instance, they will impersonate phone numbers that use the first 6 digits of the recipient's phone number to make the calls appear as if they originate from a local source. And this practice, known as caller ID spoofing or neighbor spoofing, is similar to a villain in an action movie who dons a disguise to trick unsuspecting victims into thinking that the villain is someone that he's not. Now, in the movies, of course, the hero generally is unmasked, or the hero unmasks the villain just in time, but all too often consumers don't realize that the number has been spoofed until it's too late. And that's why we are exploring call authentication, a process for reliably determining whether the caller is in fact who he purports to be, in order to help eliminate fraudulent spoofing attempts and to further secure our telephone networks. At the heart of this inquiry is the SHAKEN, or the Signature-Based Handling of Asserted Information Using Tokens framework, which is developed by the STIR, or the Secure Telephone Identity Revisited Working Group. Why do I think they're trolling us on that one? It's just too easy. And other dedicated industry stakeholders. And if things go well, our hope is that, just like in the movies, someday, soon, consumers won't be as easily fooled by a villain's disguise on the phone. Now, the next item is a second notice of inquiry that tackles the issue of reassigned numbers. And Mr. Weber outlined well, I think, the nub of this issue. How do we enable callers to reach consumers who do, in fact, want to be reached and avoid calling those who don't? That's a tricky problem. How do we address this problem? Well, as we heard during Ms. Schroeder's presentation, the second notice of inquiry tees up several approaches for carriers to report phone number reassignments and for businesses to be able to access that database. For instance, the FCC could designate an administrator of a central reassigned numbers database, or providers could report the reassigned numbers directly to businesses or to an aggregator. Or perhaps the providers could operate a database that could be queried as needed. We hope to get solid public input on the best way to structure a useful and cost-effective database that benefits consumers and callers alike. So in short, with these notices of inquiry, we launch additional, potentially potent lines of attack against illegal and unwanted robocalls. I, like my colleagues, would like to thank the staff that worked on these items across the many bureaus and offices, the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, the Enforcement Bureau, the Wireless Bureau, the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, and the Office of General Counsel. Those of you who are not included, I'm sure will have a chance to get a bite at the apple sometime. But to the folks who are listed on this screen, who I don't have the ability to name individually here, thank you very much for your efforts. As has often been said from this dais, this is the number one issue that consumers complain about to the FCC. They will be much better off because of your efforts. With that, we will proceed to a vote on item number 1, which is the Call Authentication Trust Anchor Notice of Inquiry. Commissioner Clyburn?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. I will now proceed to a vote on item number 2, which is the notice of inquiry on advanced methods to target and eliminate unlawful robocalls. Commissioner Clyburn?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye as well. The item, again, is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thank you to the staff for your work. And Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the third item on your agenda will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. It is entitled, Protecting Consumers from Unauthorized Carrier Changes and Related Unauthorized Charges. And Patrick Weber, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Weber, you're again in the hot seat.
Thank you. Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today I am pleased to introduce an item that proposes steps to protect consumers from slamming the unauthorized change of a consumer's preferred telecommunications provider and cramming the placement of unauthorized charges on a consumer's telephone bill. Both are long-standing and continuing problems for consumers. Slammers and crammers lie during telemarketing and verification calls while trying to lure consumers into a carrier change that they never wanted. And they steal from consumers by putting unauthorized charges on their telephone bills. They often target vulnerable populations like the elderly, recent immigrants, small businesses, and non-English speakers, who sometimes do not realize they have been slammed or crammed. Despite this fact, the Commission received over 8,000 slamming and cramming complaints from consumers over the last 2 years. The Notice of Proposed Rulemaking before you proposes steps that will both strengthen the Commission's ability to take action against slammers and crammers and deter carriers from slamming and cramming in the first place. I would like to thank the other bureaus and offices that helped us: the Office of General Counsel, the Enforcement Bureau, the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. With me at the table are Kurt Schroeder, Chief of CGB's Consumer Policy Division, Nancy Stevenson, Deputy Chief of the Division, and Kim Wild, Attorney Advisor in the Division. Kim will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
The Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM, before you proposes new measures to stop slamming and cramming by unscrupulous carriers. At its core, the NPRM proposes to codify rules to prohibit slamming and cramming. Previously, the Commission has enforced slamming and cramming violations pursuant to general provisions of the Communications Act and the Commission's rules. Specifically, this item proposes a rule to prohibit misrepresentation on carrier telemarketing calls to consumers that often precede a carrier switch. This rule would render any subsequent verification of a carrier change invalid if the sales call was based on misrepresentation or deception. The item also proposes to codify a rule against cramming. This rule would prohibit carriers from placing or causing to be placed on any telephone bill charges that were not authorized by the consumer. The NPRM seeks general comment on requiring carriers to freeze a consumer's choice of telecommunications providers by default, unlike the current rules, which require a consumer to request a freeze first. As an alternative, the NPRM seeks comment on allowing the consumer's current carrier to double-check with the consumer that he or she actually wants to switch. The NPRM also seeks comment on other possible measures to discourage slamming, such as requiring carriers to record their telemarketing sales calls. It asks whether carriers or their agents should be required to inform the consumer that the purpose of the sales call is to persuade the customer to switch providers. The item asks whether alleged abuses of the third-party verification, or TPV, process are so pervasive as to warrant either a ban on TPVs as a method of verifying a consumer's authorization of a carrier change, or other measures to make it more difficult for carriers to fabricate TPVs. Finally, the item seeks comment on requiring wireline billing carriers to block third-party charges for local and long-distance service unless consumers have agreed to opt in to such charges. An effective combination of these proposed measures could significantly reduce slamming and cramming. We recommend adoption of this item and request editorial privileges to make technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Weil, we'll now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Clyburn.
In recent years, the FCC has doled out millions of dollars in fines to deter unscrupulous carriers from scamming our citizens out of their hard-earned money. Fraudulent practices known as slamming and cramming often prey on our nation's most vulnerable. And with the rise of robocalling and the ease of splicing together purported customer consent for third-party verifications, we have actually seen a resurgence in unauthorized carrier charges and changes made to customers' and consumers' bills and services. It is just so overwhelming that I cannot get through this statement. What is now crystal clear is that more needs to be done to protect consumers. That is why I am pleased today that we propose to codify rules that could dramatically decrease these predatory schemes. We seek comment on adopting more consumer protections for third-party billing and third-party verification, two practices that have been subject to gaming from companies out to defraud consumers. We also seek comment on a variety of other safeguards that would make it more difficult for another carrier to slam or cram. I am grateful that we are also seeking comment on issues beyond just post-paid legacy telephone service. In an increasingly converged world, it only makes sense to see comment on how these rules would and should apply to prepaid wireless and interconnected voice over IP services. I would also like to see a record develop on whether our existing approach without these additional rules strikes the right balance. To be clear, I think we have sufficient authority to address slamming and cramming on a case-by-case basis under Sections 201 and 202 of the Communications Act. But I am open to adopting rules that would clearly articulate the standards of conduct we are expecting from carriers. Thanks to the Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau for taking the lead on an item that charts a clear path forward for greater protections for the American consumer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the previous administration, it was not uncommon for the FCC to interpret statutory provisions in the absence of any rules and in ways that were so novel that impacted companies could not have predicted what conduct would be deemed unlawful. Even worse, these interpretations were frequently announced in enforcement actions, where there is no opportunity for public comment and then cited as precedent in future items. I objected to this practice, dissenting, at least in part, from enforcement items on numerous occasions. This included several items on supposed cramming violations. I thank the Chairman, therefore, for initiating a rulemaking designed in part to adopt Commission rules regarding cramming. When dealing with more vague statutory provisions such as Section 201, it is especially important to have clear rules so that any applicable providers have certainty about what conduct is both covered and prohibited. With initiation of this proceeding, all interested parties will be able to participate in the process of rule formation, which should put any new requirements on better footing. To be clear, when enforcement actions come before the Commission that propose a fine to fine a company both for slamming and cramming for the same transaction, I still prefer to proceed under the slamming violation. I do not find it necessary to impose independent fines for unauthorized charges that are the product of the unauthorized carrier change simply to produce a larger total fine. In those instances, however, where the focus of the investigation is a standalone cramming practice, it will be helpful to point to duly adopted rules as the basis for the enforcement action. I also appreciate the willingness, even at this early stage, to listen to feedback from stakeholders about the scope and direction of the item and make corresponding edits. I agreed with several commenters that the discussion on slamming and verification in particular needed to be broadened to include actual and additional context about the state of the market, the potential impact on competition, and the ability of consumers to switch carriers, and the cost of potential rule changes. I'm particularly skeptical about instituting a default preferred inter-exchange carrier pick freeze, which could impede competition and be burdensome and confusing for consumers who have come to expect that they can switch providers freely and in a reasonable amount of time. I appreciate the Chairman and staff for working with me to implement the edits needed to round out the notice so that we receive a better record on which to proceed. and I will vote to approve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. In a classic aside during an episode of Seinfeld, Jerry receives a phone call asking if he's interested in switching his long-distance carrier. Upset about being interrupted at home, he responds by asking for the telemarketer's home phone number so that they can discuss the switch later. And we laugh then and even now, perhaps, because we can all relate to Jerry's frustration. But what the scene doesn't capture is the very real possibility that the telemarketer switched Jerry's long-distance carrier anyway, without his consent, or that his next bill contained unexplained and unauthorized charges. The switch is what is called slamming, and the imposition of unauthorized charges is known, as Mr. Weber pointed out, as cramming. Now, when they call consumers, unscrupulous carriers often lie about their identity or misrepresent their relationship to consumers' existing carriers in order to perpetrate these schemes. And to make matters worse, these carriers often target the most vulnerable Americans, the elderly, new immigrants, and non-English speakers. Well, today, the FCC tackles this problem head on. We make it clear to perpetrators and consumers alike that the law is the law by proposing to codify our ban on misrepresentation and cramming. And we set, as Commissioner O'Reilly pointed out, a firmer legal foundation that will aid us in going after anyone who pursues these unlawful practices. We put bad actors on notice, and we empower consumers to choose their carrier, the services they want, and what ultimately shows up on their bill. In addition, we seek comment on changes to our rules, like a default freeze of a consumer's preferred carrier and a default ban on certain third-party billing, measures that will make it more difficult for carriers to slam or cram their consumers. No more unfair and illegal surprises. Now, along with our recent actions on illegal robocalling and today's notices of inquiry on telephone call authentication and reassigned numbers, we are taking major concrete steps to protect American consumers. And as Mr. Bania would say, that's gold, Jerry, gold. Now, as with many of our consumer protection initiatives, this was an interdisciplinary effort. And so thank you to Kurt Schroeder, Nancy Stevenson, Mark Stone, Patrick Weber, and Kimberly Wild in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, Deborah Broderson, Doug Klein, Rick Mallon, and Linda Oliver in the Office of General Counsel, Jennifer Eberson, Richard Heineman, Erica McMahon, Phil Rosario, and Mika Severe in the Enforcement Bureau, Belford Lawson in the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, Daniel Kahn, Melissa Droller-Kirkle, and Roger Wook in the Wireline Competition Bureau, and last but certainly not least, Michael Jansen, Sue McNeil, and Mary Claire York in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. We will now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. I wasn't sure if editorial privileges were requested, but to the extent they are granted as they were requested. Thank you to the staff and Madam Secretary. We could now proceed to the next item on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the fourth item on your agenda will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau and is entitled Rural Call Completion. Chris Monteith, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Me again.
All right.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good morning again.
Good morning.
The Wireline Competition Bureau presents for your consideration a second further notice of proposed rulemaking that continues the Commission's commitment to ensuring that long-distance calls to all Americans, including rural Americans, are completed. I would like to thank the entire Wireline team for their hard work on this item, as well as our colleagues in the Enforcement Bureau and the Office of General Counsel. Seated at the table with me from the Competition Policy Division are Daniel Kahn, Division Chief, Nurali Patel, Deputy Division Chief, and David Broder, Attorney Advisor. I'm missing one staff member. I apologize. David will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The second further notice before you proposes changes to more effectively address rural call completion problems. The item would, first, propose and seek comment on whether the Commission should require covered providers to monitor the rural call completion performance of the intermediate providers with which they contract, and to hold those providers accountable for their performance. This proposal is based on industry best practices and is intended to more directly and efficiently address rural call completion problems than the Commission's existing data recording, retention, and reporting rules for covered providers. Second, the item would propose and seek comment on 3 alternative proposals to the Commission's existing data recording, retention, and reporting rules for covered providers. These alternatives would, 1, modify the rules, 2, retaining the recording and retention rules but eliminating the reporting rules, and 3, eliminating the recording, retention, and reporting rules. These proposals are designed to enable the Commission to meet its commitment to complete a proceeding by April 2018 to reevaluate whether to keep, modify, or eliminate the data recording, retention, and reporting rules. Third, the item would seek comment on how the Commission should proceed with its existing safe harbor rule for covered providers. Finally, the item would seek comment on any additional measures the Commission should take to address rural call completion problems. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brody and Ms. Monteith. We'll now turn to comments from the bench. Commissioner Clyburn.
As then acting chairwoman way back in 2013, I was proud to adopt the first report and order on rule call completion. Today, through the adoption of this item, we build on that effort, which recognized that too many in rural America were having subpar call completion experiences. At the time, I said that at the core of the FCC's mission is an obligation to ensure all Americans have access to reliable communication services. This is as true in 2017 as it was in 2013, perhaps even more so. Thus, I am pleased to see the Commission carrying forward the work we started over 5 years ago, because all of our talk of building out networks to rural and high-cost areas would be for naught if that network and those services were unreliable. Today's item takes another step forward in ensuring reliable telephone service to rural areas. While our 2013 order addressed the obvious symptoms of failed call completion, delayed calls, false ringtones, or no ringtone at all, and deemed them harmful, we did not know how big the problem really was. Thanks to our data collection requirements, we now have a clearer picture. Sunlight, as the saying goes, has been an excellent disinfectant. I'm wondering what I tried to fuse with that one. Disinfectant.
Got some coffee.
I know. I think I need it these days. And I firmly believe that the record-keeping, retention, and reporting requirements have ensured that at least some covered providers got their houses in order. But while these efforts are noteworthy, our job is not yet done. This is why I am pleased we are seeking comment on further substantive protections for rural consumers. While many have cleaned up their act, as I mentioned, the Wireline Bureau's report shows that there are several providers whose call completion rates to rural areas are still unacceptable. I hope that the rules we ultimately adopt will help stamp out this shortfall once and for all. I am also pleased that we are looking at cleaning up our data collection by inviting a broader discussion on revisions, additions, and substitutions to our current rules. Simply removing our reporting requirements would be an invitation to less than model carriers to skirt the FCC's call completion rules, so I look forward to reviewing the record and charting a path forward on improving our record-keeping, retention, and reporting requirements. Thanks again to the Wireline Competition Bureau for your work to ensure that rural America receives robust telephone service. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was not at the Commission when the agency adopted the original call completion rules. The former Acting Chairwoman mentioned, but I commend my colleagues in the Commission staff for their work to address this issue. Although these efforts and those of industry are, through those efforts and those of industry, there are far fewer reports of call completion issues today. That's not to suggest that there is not some work to do, as filings by rural carrier associations highlight that point. Given the vast improvement in the overall circumstances, it does seem an appropriate time to step back, take stock of our rules, and seek comment on whether changes are appropriate in light of the facts on the ground today. This second further notice seeks comment on swapping one approach, reporting requirements, for another, required covered carriers to police intermediate providers. I do agree that if the current reporting requirements are not yielding useful information, we should consider modifying them and eliminating them altogether. At the same time, I have some questions and reservations about the potential mandates on covered carriers. As my prior statements make clear, I'm generally weary of transforming voluntary industry practices into commission requirements, and we should be very clear that carriers will not be held strictly liable for honest mistakes or circumstances beyond their control. In addition, I'm interested in understanding the costs and benefits of this new approach. At least some carriers have already taken steps to limit the number of intermediate providers and monitor their performance, so perhaps adding this requirement will not prove to be unduly burdensome in the end, assuming that we get to that point. In terms of substance, I was not in favor of applying this new structure to one-way VoIP, which the Commission has clearly and rightfully distinguished from interconnected VoIP in other circumstances. So I'm pleased that this provision was removed from the item. I will certainly vote to approve the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. For too many Americans, a dark and pessimistic truth underlies Carly Rae Jepsen's catchy and upbeat stanza, "Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's my number, and so call me maybe." And that's because there have been difficulties completing long-distance telephone calls to rural America. Maybe a long-distance call made to a distant town will connect, and maybe it won't. But maybe won't cut it when it comes to connecting Americans, and that's why the FCC is paying close attention to rural call completion. Although complaints on this issue dropped by more than half in 2016, there are still far too many callers experiencing delayed and dropped calls, as well as false ringtones and false busy signals when calling a rural family member or a business. A few weeks ago, I heard about this problem firsthand and repeatedly in places like Lorenz, Iowa, population 1,258. With the second further notice, we propose rules to require providers under our jurisdiction to actively monitor and promptly address rural call completion problems. We believe that these new rules will be more effective in directly and swiftly addressing call completion issues than our existing regulations. We'll stay focused on this issue until we can remove that qualifier maybe from rural Americans' telecom lexicon. However appealing Carly's crush might have been, even more important are the calls made from a daughter in New York to her dad in rural Ohio to wish him a happy birthday, or the calls from customers to a southern e-commerce startup. I want to thank Commissioner Clyburn for her leadership over these many years in highlighting the importance of this issue, and thanks to the FCC's excellent staff for building on the foundation that she set. From the Wireline Competition Bureau, David Brody, Jean Ann Collins, Adam Copeland, Alex Espinoza, Daniel Kahn, Chris Monteith, Nirali Patel, Steve Rosenberg, and Dana Zellman. From the Enforcement Bureau, Margaret Daly and Colin Lee. And from the Office of General Counsel, Bill Dever, Rick Mallon, and Bill Richardson. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the fifth item on your agenda will be presented by the Office of Engineering and Technology and is entitled Amendment of Parts 0, 1, 2, 15, and 18 of the Commission's rules regarding authorization of radio frequency equipment. Julie Knapp, Chief of the Office of Engineering and Technology, will give the introduction.
Terrific. Thanks. Mr. Knapp, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Chairman Pye, Commissioners Clyburn and O'Reilly. For more than 50 years, the Commission's Equipment Authorization Program, I wasn't there for all 50. Has been the instrument. Close. Has been the instrument to ensure that radio frequency devices comply with our technical rules and share the airwaves without causing harmful interference. The program has continually evolved to keep pace with technology and to accomplish our compliance objectives with the least burden on the industry and the public. And the item that we're about to present does just that. Here with me at the table are Bruce Romano, Associate Chief of OET, Rashmi Doshi, who is the head of our laboratory, and Brian Butler, who's a Senior Engineer in the Spectrum Policy Branch. I'd also like to recognize the significant substantive contributions of Bill Hurst out at our lab and George Tannehill, as well as Jameson Prime. And we also had help from virtually every bureau and office because almost all have got equipment of some sort that's subject in a way to compliance with technical rules that's overseen through the Equipment Authorization Program. Brian will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Before you today is a first report in order that would take several steps to simplify and streamline our equipment authorization rules to better reflect today's technology, including modern product development, manufacturing and marketing processes, time-to-market considerations, and the latest testing methods and capabilities. For many years, the FCC has required RF devices to bear a permanent compliance label. Yet today, many devices, such as cell phones, tablets, and laptops that have a video display can provide user manuals and other information via a display screen. This item would bring our rules into the modern era by allowing devices that have a screen to display the FCC compliance information electronically. This action is consistent with the E-Label Act and will simplify production and eliminate the cost and effort of printing and applying labels or etching information onto the case of every product manufactured. Additionally, for roughly 40 years, we have required importers to fill out the Form 740. This is an FCC-specific customs declaration showing FCC compliance for imported radio frequency devices. When these rules came into effect, there were only about 1,000 forms submitted to Customs and Border Protection each month, as the explosion in radio technology had not yet taken place. Today, radios seem to be in just about everything. Obviously, cell phones and Wi-Fi routers, but also refrigerators, washing machines, thermostats, TV sets, etc., etc. The volume is so great that the review of these forms, even if handled electronically, is not a useful or efficient way to monitor compliance with our rules. This item would eliminate the requirement to file the Form 740 altogether. The information about products sold in the market is readily available on the Internet, and our new rules will allow the compliance information to be placed on the company's website. This easy access, combined with the Customs and Border Protection's new electronic database, will allow us to monitor the marketplace of imported products for noncompliance. Working with Customs, we'll be able to take targeted action to stop noncompliant products from being imported into the country. The item would take a number of other actions to make the process of equipment authorization more efficient. For instance, it would combine two separate self-authorization programs into one, which will help avoid confusion as to which process to use for any given product. The combined program would be called the Supplier's Declaration of Conformity. Finally, the item would update our rules to incorporate more recent industry testing methodologies. We recommend adoption of the item and request editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butler and Mr. Knapp. We'll now turn to Commissioner Clyburn for her comments.
In 1998, we saw the first MP3 players hit the U.S. marketplace. It was also the last time the Commission conducted a comprehensive review of our equipment authorization procedures. To say that technology has advanced significantly since then would be a great understatement. But in today's order, we make substantial progress in updating the Commission's equipment authorization rules by merging the two self-approval processes into one, allowing for electronic labeling as required by the E-Label Act, revising our importation requirements, including eliminating the requirement to file Form 740 with the Customs and Border Patrol, and increasing the Commission's ability to keep pace with advancements in technologies. With these changes, we acknowledge the tremendous technological innovations made in the nearly 2 decades and usher the Commission's equipment authorization program into the 21st century. Thank you, Julie Knapp, however long you've been here, and the staff of the Office of Engineering Technology for your ongoing efforts to modernize our equipment authorization procedures.
You and Marconi were not contemporaries. I just want to clarify. Yes, yeah. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Wow, that's a tough one. I am pleased to support today's order that streamlines and updates many of our equipment authorization rules. reducing the paperwork burdens of unnecessary forms, simplifying our self-approval procedures for equipment authorization by turning two procedures and processes into one, and fully implementing e-labeling should result in real cost savings for manufacturers. Even I must admit that it seems like I've been talking about e-labeling for ages. It is at the point where I feel there's little left to be said, so I'll keep it short. What started as one of my earlier blogs moved on to an item on OET's knowledge database, became a federal law, turned into a notice, and now is finally part of our rules. No longer will manufacturers have to routinely undertake the cost of placing or etching small labels on each and every piece of equipment when this information can easily be accessible digitally on a screen. I'd like to recognize Senator Deb Fischer, who championed this idea before Congress, resulting in the passage of the E-Label Act. And I thank the chairman for moving this item along with Julie and his team, who've been diligently working on these issues with me since 2014. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. The details of this item might be complex, but the upshot is pretty simple. With this report in order, we are aiming to improve and increase the efficiency of our rules. For instance, we are modernizing rules relating to the authorization of radio frequency equipment. Our decades-old rules subject new technologies, like personal computers, to a more strenuous self-approval process than what is required for more established technologies. PCs, of course, are no longer new and unfamiliar, and they have tried and true testing procedures. Yet they are still subject to the stricter and costlier self-approval process. Consolidating our approval procedures into the new Supplier's Declaration of Conformity procedure, I love that, a declaration of conformity. I declare I'm like everybody else. It's good. Is a common sense solution to the problem of regulating rapidly changing markets and will eliminate unnecessary and costly red tape. We are also continuing the charge into the digital age by replacing physical labeling of FCC-authorized equipment with electronic labeling. Codifying this rule provides flexibility to manufacturers with the goal of benefiting American consumers. We also act to change the measurement standards so that the FCC can be far more agile in responding to changes in technology and industry standards. And this is a good thing because at the rate that technology is advancing these days, it's more important than ever to think prospectively and to prevent innovation from getting stuck in regulatory muck. I, like my colleagues, would like to thank the staff for their work on this issue and for Commissioner O'Reilly for highlighting these issues over the past several years. Brian Butler, Rashmi Doshi, William Hurst, Julie Knapp, Siobhan Philemon, Jameson Prime, Bruce Romano, and George Tannehill. Due to the widespread applicability of the equipment authorization rules, as Chief Knapp pointed out, OET worked with almost every bureau and office in drafting this item. And while there are many more people to thank for their assistance, of particular note are Saurabh Chabra, Tom Jaranj, Garnet Hanley, Sue McNeil, and Scott Stone from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Jennifer Burton, Jason Koslowski, Jeremy Marcus, and Aspa Perutzis from the Enforcement Bureau, Keith McCrickard, David Horowitz, Bill Richardson, and Ryan Yates in the Office of General Counsel, and Nicole Ungale in the Office of Managing Director. Thanks to all of you for this work. We'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as granted. Thanks to the terrific staff of OET for your work. Madam Secretary, could you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the sixth item on your agenda will also be presented by the Office of Engineering and Technology and is entitled Amendment of Parts 1, 2, 15, 90, and 95 of the Commission's rules to permit radar services in the 76 to 81 gigahertz band. Julie Knapp, Chief of the Office, will give the introduction.
Thanks to the youthful and spry Mr. Knapp we go. Yes.
In 1995, the Commission made available 1 gigahertz of spectrum at 76 to 77 gigahertz to support budding interest in developing collision avoidance radar technology. Vehicular radar technology and applications developed over time, and today long-range vehicular radar technologies are widespread and an integral part of the auto safety applications for many cars, particularly for collision avoidance and adaptive cruise control. The item we are presenting today will build upon this success by providing additional spectrum to support new short-range vehicular radar applications that can identify nearby vehicles and objects with greater precision, which is important for applications such as lane departure warnings and blind spot detection. And as you'll hear in the presentation, we're also consolidating the existing bands into this portion of the spectrum. So here with me at the table are Jameson Prime, who is the Chief of the Policy and Rules Division, Howard Griboff, who is Senior Attorney, and Patrick Forster, who is a Senior Engineer in the Spectrum Policy Branch. Patrick will make the presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The item before you would change the spectrum available for vehicular radars, which are included in many vehicles today to support features such as collision avoidance and adaptive cruise control. Vehicular radars historically operate in the 24 gigahertz band and in the 76 to 77 gigahertz band. Today's item would expand the 76 gigahertz band allocation to 76 to 81 gigahertz and phase out vehicular radars at 24 gigahertz. The expanded bandwidth will support new short-range vehicular radars that can identify nearby vehicles and objects with even greater precision, which is important for applications such as lane change warnings and detecting pedestrians, among other things. Consolidating all new vehicular radars into this single harmonized band will also aid the development of equipment that can be used within and outside the United States. This can bring automotive radars to market faster and ultimately reduce the price of this important technology. The item similarly expands the availability of the whole 76 to 81 gigahertz band for radars that are used at airports for applications such as the detection of debris on runways that could harm airplanes on takeoff and landing. The expanded spectrum will allow the development of new safety applications, such as wingtip radars that can help aircraft avoid colliding with equipment, buildings, and other aircraft while moving on airport grounds. All of these radar applications will be authorized on a licensed by rule basis under a new subpart of Part 95 of the rules. For these reasons, staff recommends giving a green light to this item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forster. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner Clyburn.
The first gasoline-powered automobile driven on American soil was built by John William Lambert back in 1891. I promise no more Julie Knapp jokes. But I'm so tempted. Then referred to as a horseless carriage, it drove on 3 wheels with 2 large wheels in the rear and 1 smaller one in the front. It used a lever for steering and ran on a 1-cylinder engine. According to Ohio legend, the first car accident in American history occurred that same year in an Ohio city where Lambert's vehicle hit the roots of a tree stump and crashed into a hitching post. Fortunately, no one suffered any major injuries, and with help, that car continued on its way. The transportation landscape has advanced significantly since Lambert's early experiments. What has not changed, however, is the critical importance of vehicle safety. While we enthusiastically harness new technology that will ultimately propel us to a driverless future, we must maintain our focus on safety, and radar applications play an important role. Vehicular radars serve multiple safety functions, including the ability to determine the distance and movement of objects adjacent to vehicles, which helps to improve a driver's perception in poor visibility conditions. Those of us who use adaptive cruise control or collision avoidance systems know just how important and beneficial automotive radar applications can be. And today's decision will foster even more innovation for vehicular as well as non-vehicular radar systems, such as foreign object debris detection radars on airport runways and aircraft wingtip radars. Back in 1891, it was unlikely that Lambert could have predicted the spectacular advances in transportations we see today. We, too, are limited in predicting the innovative landmarks sure to be realized over the next 10, let alone 100 years. And I think that's a good thing. It is also my hope that with this item, that we will open the door to many more exciting possibilities. Again, I would like to thank the ageless Julie Knapp and the staff of the Office of Engineering Technology for your important work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. I think we could measure his age if we had to. I wouldn't say ageless just yet.
Cut him open and count the rings?
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
Wow.
Poor Julie.
I've got nothing.
Wow. Okay. My apologies. I must admit that I have been more than hesitant to allocate such a large swath of spectrum to auto safety systems as the item does before us. This institution has a mixed track record when it comes to seeing such technologies come to fruition. Specifically, it has almost been 2 decades since the Commission allocated 5.9 spectrum to DSRC systems and still have little to show for it. At least in this case, the vehicular radar technology exists and is deployed. In fact, today's item consolidates all radars in one place in the 76 to 81 gigahertz band. In return for access to the spectrum, the auto industry will vacate other bands over time. Moreover, this action is consistent with efforts to globally harmonize spectrum for vehicular radar operations in the 76 to 81 gigahertz band. For these reasons, I will vote for the item. While long-range radars have been operating in 1 gigahertz of spectrum, a case has been made that short-range radars need 4 gigahertz of spectrum to provide the necessary high resolution to detect and identify objects at close range. The practical functions of these radars include blind spot detection, lane change assist, collision warnings, autonomous braking, and the detection of pedestrians and bicycles. When I hear of these benefits, I get an odd sense of déjà vu. Several of these safety solutions are exactly the same or similar to those championed as reasons for the DSRC. As I said before, it is necessary to determine exactly what safety systems will be provided using DSRC and whether they can be provided using other technologies, including the very technology we consider today. Dedicated DSRC spectrum should not be used to provide safety functionality, or any services for that matter, that can be offered using radars and other technologies being used or in the planning stages as we generally move towards more autonomous cars. Limiting the use of the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum for only safety solutions that cannot be otherwise provided elsewhere would ensure, at a minimum, unlicensed spectrum users can share with DSRC without causing harmful interference. We may even find the purported benefits of DSRC no longer hold up, but that will have to be a discussion for another day. I thank the Chairman very much.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. I, like many of you, always try to be conscious of the rules of the road, but when I'm in the car with my kids, vehicular safety becomes an all-encompassing concern. Thankfully, auto manufacturers are continuing to roll out new, proven technologies that enable services like collision avoidance and blind spot monitoring and lane change assistance. Vehicular radar systems can improve our driving experience and help our families stay safe. Well, today the FCC does its part to promote this consumer-friendly innovation by giving these systems the bandwidth needed to operate fully and securely. As was pointed out by Mr. Forster, we allocate a contiguous spectrum block in the 76 to 81 gigahertz band to these services. We expand, therefore, the existing 76 to 77 gigahertz allocation for vehicular radars by 4 gigahertz. We are also moving other vehicular radar operations from other bands to be consolidated into these frequencies. Access to this contiguous block of spectrum will allow for new innovations and the expansion of potentially life-saving vehicular radar technologies. We also open up this band to expand access for fixed and mobile radars in airport operations areas. And this could not only ensure safety, but hopefully prevent flight delays as well. For instance, one commenter noted that wingtip collisions account for approximately 25% of all aircraft ground incidents. Wingtip radars on aircraft may help with collision avoidance on the tarmac, among other areas. Like my colleagues, I want to thank the terrific staff that worked on this item, Rashmi Doshi, Patrick Forster, Howard Gribov, Matthew Hussey, Ira Keltz, Julie Knapp, Jerry Matisse, and Jameson Prime from the Office of Engineering Technology, Tom Derringe and Scott Stone from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Jeremy Marcus and Aspa Peroutzis from the Enforcement Bureau, David Horowitz and Anjali Singh from the Office of General Counsel. Your work impacts millions of lives every day, and in this particular case is going to be key in the years to come for improving us when we're in the cars. With that, we'll move to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
The chair will vote aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as granted. Thanks to the folks at OET. Madam Secretary, could you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the seventh item on your agenda will be presented by the Office of Engineering and Technology and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and is entitled Promoting Spectrum Access for Wireless Microphone Operations. Once again, Julie Knapp, Chief of OET, will give the introduction.
To the rising phoenix, Mr. Knapp, it's all you.
We thought about doing this as a singing presentation, but we just couldn't get it across the line.
Hey, you had my blessing, that's all I can say.
So with the incentive auction and the repacking of the TV bands, less spectrum will be available for wireless microphone operations in the UHF TV bands. Anticipating this result, the Commission has taken action to accommodate the needs of wireless microphone users, both by promoting more efficient use of the TV band spectrum that will continue to be available, and by making more spectrum available for wireless microphones in other parts of the spectrum. Today we present for your consideration an order on reconsideration that fine-tunes a few of the technical rules that were adopted in 2015, and a further notice of proposed rulemaking that seeks comment on providing a limited expansion of eligibility for licensed wireless microphones. At the table with me today are Paul Murray, who's Associate Chief of OET, and Neshe Gwendelsberger, who is the Senior Deputy Chief of the Wireless Bureau. And I'd also like to recognize Ira Keltz, Jerry Matisse, Hugh Van Tile, and Rod Small in OET, as well as John Schabel, Steve Buenzo, and Scott Stone, as well as Neshe, of course, in the Wireless Bureau for their help in preparing this item. Paul will present the item.
Thanks.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
Wireless microphones are used in a variety of settings in our daily lives. Their operations range from broadcasting and other professional uses, such as live theater, where there is a need for high-performance microphones, to individual consumers' use of handheld mics at conference centers or in karaoke bars. Wireless microphone users serve to enhance event productions, including those at music venues, film studios, convention halls, corporate events, and houses of worship. The order on reconsideration before you addresses 5 petitions for reconsideration on wireless microphone issues that were decided in 2 related Commission orders. Those orders had established a variety of technical rules for accommodating licensed and unlicensed wireless microphones in the TV bands, the repurposed 600 megahertz band, including the guard band and duplex gap, and in various other frequency bands. The order on reconsideration revises and clarifies certain of these technical and operational rules. These include revisions to the spurious emission limits for wireless mics to conform them to international standards, and it includes clarifications regarding the appropriate measurement of wireless mic output power, the applicability of certain antenna connector rules, and coordination requirements for operation in certain bands. With respect to the license operations in the 1435 to 1525 megahertz band, the order affirms the Commission's decision earlier to limit wireless mic users to access to no more than 30 megahertz of spectrum. But it also provides clarification as to how the limit applies to particular users operating in that band at the same general location, which should facilitate each user's access to the spectrum resources it needs. One petition for reconsideration requested that the Commission take action to permit certain unlicensed users, smaller theater, music, and performing arts organizations, specifically entities that do not currently routinely use 50 or more mics at their location and don't qualify for a license. The Commission these entities had sought interference protection from unlicensed white space operations in the TV bands. In the order on reconsideration, the Commission declines to provide such interference protection to these users because unlicensed entities do not generally qualify for interference protection. At the same time, the Commission recognizes that some of these smaller users have identical or similar needs to licensed wireless mic users, and thus may merit interference protection to access additional spectrum resources following the incentive auction and the repacking of the TV band. Accordingly, in the further notice, the Commission proposes to permit professional theater, music, performing arts, and similar organizations to obtain a Part 74 license to operate wireless mics in smaller towns, at smaller venues, based on the applicant's demonstrated need and requisite professional abilities to operate these mics in the available spectrum bands. The staff recommends adoption of this order on reconsideration for the notice and requests editorial privileges.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. We'll now turn to comments from the bench. Commissioner Clyburn.
A newscaster reporting on location during a threatening summer storm. The riveting performance at this year's most talked about play. Live updates during must-see primetime sporting events. These moments are all enhanced by the use of wireless microphones. In recognition of the growing and important role wireless mics play, the Commission has, over the years, taken numerous steps to provide operational flexibility to the industry, as well as access to the spectrum necessary for us to be better informed and entertained. In today's order of reconsideration, the Commission addresses many of the issues raised in petitions for reconsideration of two 2015 orders. The technical revisions and clarifications made in this order will provide manufacturers much needed certainty as they continue to bring products to market. Moreover, in the further notice, the Commission recognizes that certain unlicensed wireless mic users that are not eligible for a Part 74 license may nonetheless have a need for interference protection at their events. Accordingly, we seek comment on how best to accommodate the needs of these users. The item reflects the hard work of the staff of the Office of Engineering and Technology and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, as well as many others throughout this Commission. I thank all of you for your hard work on this item and for your ongoing efforts in these proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll submit a longer statement, but just make a couple points. From the time that the Commission commenced the broadcast incentive auction proceeding, we knew that the wireless mics operating in the TV band were going to present quite a challenge. Post-auction, full-power broadcasters will be repacked, and all other users of the band would have to do more with less. This led to the Commission to initiate a series of inquiries on how we could accommodate the need for wireless mics, including opening up new spectrum bands. The Commission also decided that entities using 50 or more mics could obtain licenses and register for interference protection from other unlicensed users. In doing so, it tried to strike a balance between protecting the operations of professional sound companies or venues and that have a large need for a large number of mics and high-quality sound, and ensuring that spectrum is shared effectively with other licensed mic users and unlicensed use, such as TV white space devices. Admittedly, the selection of 50 microphones is a proxy for those users who were likely to require interference protection, and high-quality sound never really appeared to be supported by the data. 50 seemed to be picked because it was reasonable that most large professional events, such as Broadway shows or concerts at the Verizon Center, and the large sporting events would need a lot of mics. That's not exactly the best way to make policy. Because this number was not based on sound data, I generally support reopening this issue. I do wonder, however, about the possible direction we're headed in the further notice, and I'll talk about that later. Regardless of any concerns, I will support the reconsideration of this issue, especially since questions were added at my request that will elicit a dialogue on some of these various issues. Additionally, a paragraph was added seeking comment on alternatives to the proposed case-by-case approach contained within. I thank the chairman for taking my concerns into consideration in this item. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. One of the popular tropes of our time is a so-called mic drop. But what is not so popular is a wireless mic drop, one in which the sound cuts out during a critical moment. And that's because wireless microphones serve important purposes across the country, as we have heard during Mr. Murray's able presentation. And that's why our decision today clarifies and finalizes the FCC's technical rules for wireless microphone operations. Our decision will allow this technology to continue to effectively serve America's theaters, music venues, and live events following the incentive auction and reconfiguration of the TV bands. Additionally, as Mr. Murray observed, we propose in the further notice a limited expansion of licensee eligibility based on a user's demonstrated need for and capability of providing high-quality audio during productions, regardless of the number of mics that user typically employs. And here's how this would work. Imagine that a small professional theater decides to put on a production of the hit show Hamilton, but the performance only requires the use of 30 wireless microphones. Under our current rules, this theater could not get interference protection from white spaces devices operating in the same bands, so the actor's carefully crafted performance could be interrupted by a competing unlicensed device. Not only would this affect the consumer experience, but Alexander Hamilton would risk throwing away his shot. Our limited expansion would accommodate the needs of wireless mic users like this one. I want to thank the Commission staff who worked so diligently on this item from the Office of Engineering and Technology. Thank you to Rashmi Doshi, Ira Keltz, Julie Knapp, Jerry Matisse, Paul Murray, Rodney Small, and Hugh Van Tool. From the Wireless Bureau, thank you to Steve Bunzo, Neshe Gundelsberger, John Schabel, and Scott Stone. And finally, from the Office of General Counsel, thank you to David Horowitz and Keith McCrickard. We'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The ayes have it, and the item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested.
Just to clarify, I didn't know if it was, I might have missed it. It was just on the technical and conforming edits. Is that right?
Yes, that's all. Yes.
Yep. We're good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the 8th item on your agenda will be presented by the Office of General Counsel and is entitled Game Show Network LLC Complainant versus Cablevision Systems Corp. Defendant. Brendan Carr, General Counsel to the Commission, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. General Carr, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Office of General Counsel is presenting for your consideration a decision in a program carriage case. Bill Dever took the laboring oar on this one for OGC, and so I want to thank him for all the work he did on it, recognize his efforts, and Bill will be presenting the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The order before you arises from a program carriage complaint filed in 2011 by Game Show Network, or GSN, against Cablevision. GSN is a video programming vendor that is co-owned by Sony and DirecTV, now AT&T. Cablevision is a multi-channel video programming distributor, or MVPD, and it is not affiliated with GSN. In its complaint, GSN alleges that Cablevision discriminated against it on the basis of affiliation, or more specifically non-affiliation in this case, in violation of the Communications Act. As part of its case, GSN alleges that it is similarly situated to two cable networks, namely WeTV and Wedding Central, which it says are women-oriented networks that were affiliated with Cablevision, and that Cablevision treated GSN differently than those two networks in violation of FCC rules. In particular, Cablevision changed distribution of GSN from its expanded basic programming tier to a less widely distributed premium sports tier to save on programming costs. Cablevision did not move WeTV or Wedding Central, and GSN argues, among other things, that Cablevision's decision to treat GSN differently than WeTV and Wedding Central violated federal law. In 2012, the Media Bureau found substantial and material questions of fact and set the case for hearing before an ALJ. In 2015, after the trial before the ALJ, the FCC's Enforcement Bureau, which was a party to the proceeding, filed comments urging the ALJ to deny the complaint. However, in November 2016, the ALJ issued an initial decision that granted GSN's complaint. Cablevision has appealed that decision to the Commission, and the order before you would reverse that determination. First, the order agrees with the views expressed in 2015 by the staff of the Enforcement Bureau that GSN failed to produce any direct evidence of unlawful affiliation-based discrimination. Second, the order agrees with the Enforcement Bureau's view that Cablevision did not make out a case based on circumstantial evidence because it failed to establish that GSN was similarly situated to the two women-oriented networks, WeTV and Wedding Central. Indeed, the record reveals stark differences between GSN and those two networks, including in terms of actual audiences delivered, core programming, and advertiser appeal. Third, as an independent basis for denying the complaint, we find that granting GSN relief would not be consistent with the D.C. Circuit's Tennis Channel precedent. There, the court indicated that a network bringing a program carriage complaint must show that the requested carriage would have offered some net benefit to the MVPD. That is not the case here because removing GSN from the expanded basic tier was a profitable decision for Cablevision as an MVPD. We would like to thank the Media Bureau staff who contributed to preparation of the item, including Raylyn Remry, and also recognize the contributions from Scott Novak and Jennifer Tatel in OGC. OGC recommends adoption of the order and requests editorial privileges, extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now turn to comments from the bench. Commissioner Clyburn.
It clearly states on our agency's website that the job of the FCC's administrative law judge, or ALJ, is to, I quote, preside at the hearing during which documents and sworn testimonies are received in evidence and witnesses are cross-examined. Such evidentiary hearings are quite familiar to me as a former state commissioner, and I have remarked in the past that the FCC could benefit from conducting similar hearings during its own rulemaking process, something that I know will be embraced by the chair. But the reality is that our agency is not structured to undertake such an extensive examination and therefore relies on the ALJ to conduct evidentiary hearings. The office functions like a trial court, reviewing thousands of documents, hearing witness testimony, and rendering a decision based on a preponderance of the evidence. This process can take years, and it should come as no surprise that reversing an ALJ's decision is quite infrequent. Research by my staff found a few examples from the 1980s and early 90s where the Commission reversed ALJ's decisions involving individual broadcast applications. And while some may point to the Tennis Channel case as a recent example, the Commission's reversal of the ALJ decision came only after the D.C. Circuit's decision. In this case, however, the ALJ reached its decision after cross-examination of a dozen witnesses and a review of approximately 1,000 documentary exhibits. Fast forward to just over a month ago, when I was asked to consider an order reversing the expert findings of an impartial ALJ. After due consideration, I dissent from today's order because I conclude that the Commission improperly overruled the ALJ's decision. The Commission reviews questions of law de novo, but accords deference to the ALJ on issues of fact. In the instant order, the Commission dives deep into the underlying record, dredging up issues of fact around the evidence of discrimination that should have remained undisturbed if it correctly follows the standard of review. Today we set a dangerous precedent, one that I hope will not become a trend. Allow me to also take this opportunity to highlight a related issue. My views on the plight of independent programmers is widely known, and while GSN may have owners with deep pockets, this case demonstrates the inherent challenges facing programmers who are not vertically integrated with a pay TV distributor. This is why I believe the time is now for us to move to a final order that ensures independent and diverse voices, that they have a place in this vibrant media landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the item and its conclusion. At the same time, I have difficulty understanding the process in this case and why it took nearly 6 years to resolve a program carriage complaint. That is not acceptable under any circumstances. In all honesty, I lost control of my remote control years ago, and most of the time, the TV is now turned to things like Bubble Guppies, Paw Patrol, and Elmo's World. But I still sneak in a show or two occasionally, and my wife is fond of a number of programs that many would consider women's programming, such as Say Yes to the Dress. That said, I have a hard time seeing any scenario in which WeTV or the Wedding Central, which no longer exists, could be comparable in any way to the potential target audience of the GSN. Moreover, based on the information presented, it appears that Cablevision made a decision based on its business interest regarding carriage and not one intended to discriminate against GSN. The item properly disposes of these arguments and resolves the complaint correctly. Looking at the larger picture, this entire process suggests that the administrative law judge function is not working as intended and may no longer be the most efficient means to complete our work. Like others, I would like to see the Commission develop an alternative procedure in concert with our congressional overseers to use our existing procedures to sunset or end the ALJ function, or at a minimum, reduce those matters that are considered by an ALJ. That's not meant as anything personal against our current ALJ. But as this case highlights, the Commission has to rule on all ALJ decisions anyway, so it's just adding another unnecessary layer to the overall process. I'm willing to hear arguments to the contrary, but I cannot fathom a situation where the Commission or Bureau staff cannot get the necessary facts to come to a reasoned decision. More importantly, I don't support the use of the ALJ and hearing designation order process as a threat or means to kill a proposed merger application. Let's end the charade and have the Commissioners vote up or down on applications put before us. I'd hoped to expand upon these points in a draft blog I've been kicking around for quite a while, but I think I'm just going to hold off for now. I thank the Chairman very much.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. And just wait till you get to My Little Pony and Shimmer and Shine. It's a wild ride, brother.
The funny part is it's Shimmer and Shine and someone else.
Yeah.
There's a third tag along.
Oh, indeed. I'm not going.
I have no idea what these two people are talking about, and I'm really happy about it right about now.
I will not press my luck with a statement on this issue. That's the best way to avoid any whammies. So I will simply say thank you to the Office of General Counsel, to Bill Dever, Jennifer Tatel, and Scott Novak, and to the Raylan Remy and the Media Bureau for the work on the item. I will approve as well. We'll go to a vote. Commissioner Clyburn.
Nay.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thank you, Mr. Dever. Madam Secretary, could we please go to the next item on the agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for your final item today, you will now consider a forfeiture order.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. As the Commission has done in past cases that involve the presentation of an enforcement item at an open meeting, we're going to switch up what we do here a little bit. As with all open meeting items, the Bureau circulated the forfeiture order at issue to every commissioner at least 3 weeks ago. But with enforcement items, there is a longstanding practice that we do not publicly disclose a determination to take enforcement action unless and until the FCC has voted to do so. We are going to follow that precedent here, and so we will now proceed directly to a vote on the item, followed by any statements that my colleagues care to make. Commissioner Clyburn?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Votes no.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as I expect they will be requested in short order. Madam Secretary, now to you.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the Enforcement Bureau will now provide a brief presentation on the adopted enforcement action item, and Rosemary Harold, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ms. Harold, welcome back to the Commission, and welcome to the dais.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. It's a great pleasure to be back working with terrific colleagues, old and new. Thank you also for your consideration and your votes on today's item, a forfeiture order imposing a $2.8 million penalty against a robocalling violator. With me at the table are Michael Scorato, Legal Advisor to the Bureau, Richard Hindman, Chief of the Bureau's Telecommunications Consumers Division, and Christy Thompson, Deputy Chief of that division. Christy will now present the item.
Thank you, Rosemary. Rosemary hired me to the commission, and I'm extremely happy that she is back with us again.
But you would say that, wouldn't you?
You got me there.
I'm just kidding.
Thank you much, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This forfeiture order proposes a penalty in the amount of $2,880,000 against Dialing Services, LLC for making robocalls to wireless phones without using artificial or pre-recorded voice messages without the prior express consent of the called parties. Dialing Services' actions violated the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or TCPA, which is codified at Section 227 of the Communications Act. The Enforcement Bureau's investigation of Dialing Services goes back to 2012, when investigators obtained evidence that the company was responsible for making more than 4.7 million robocalls to wireless phones over a 3-month period. The calls were non-emergency communications and were made without the called party's prior express consent in violation of the TCPA. In 2013, the Enforcement Bureau issued a citation to the company. In that citation, the Bureau warned Dialing Services that it could be liable for monetary forfeitures if it made unlawful calls to wireless phones in the future. Moreover, before and after the Bureau issued the citation, Bureau staff met with Dialing Services and its counsel multiple times. The Bureau also conducted a follow-up investigation to determine if Dialing Services had ceased making robocalls after receiving the citation. The Bureau obtained evidence showing that Dialing Services made 184 additional unauthorized robocalls to wireless phones after they were specifically warned that such conduct could provide the basis for future sanctions by the Commission. Accordingly, in 2014, by unanimous vote, the Commission issued a Notice of Apparent Liability, or NAL, proposing a $2,944,000 forfeiture against Dialing Services. Dialing Services responded to the NAL and produced evidence that 4 out of the 184 apparent violations were lawful robocalls. Dialing Services did not proffer such evidence with respect to the other 180 apparent violations. Based on this evidence, the forfeiture order finds that Dialing Services is not liable for the 4 calls for which the company was able to produce evidence that the recipient consented to the robocalls, and therefore it reduces the forfeiture proposed in the NAL by $64,000. The total penalty imposed in this forfeiture order is $2,880,000. For the reasons I have stated, as described with additional detail in the forfeiture order itself, the Enforcement Bureau supports the Commission's adoption of this item and requests editorial changes for minor technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Clyburn.
My thanks to the Enforcement Bureau staff for their presentation and for once again taking a strong stand against robocallers. Artificial or pre-recorded robocalls made to wireless phones without prior express consent are a clear violation of the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or TCPA, and today's nearly $3 million penalty against Dialing Services, LLC, shows just how serious we are about enforcement. I previously voted to approve this forfeiture order against Dialing Services, and I maintain my support today. I want to also welcome Ms. Rosemary Harold back. The only fault I will find with her today is we no longer use the word "old" when it comes to people's ages or how long we've known them. That's the only thing I'm going to want to make note of. Okay.
Less young, is that what you would say?
Don't worry about it. Just don't use it.
Message received. Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn and Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my deepest apologies to my colleague. I have a long statement I'm going to run through as fast as I can. It should come as no surprise that I continue to seek greater precision in our enforcement work. I said as much in past occasions, and I reemphasized the point at last month's disposition of an Enforcement Bureau item. When the Commission is seeking to impose substantial fines on a company and issue allegations that could seriously undermine a business, we better be sure we are right and have sufficiently addressed every component of the case. The Commission must always present the best possible arguments, evidence, and precedent. Too often, at least in my opinion, the EB items fail to meet in this standard. After months of working on this case and hoping to reach common ground, we reached a point where additional edits and input weren't getting us any closer on a couple key issues. And so now we have a forfeiture item to fine a company, Dialing Services, almost $2.9 million for operating a technology platform in violation of the TCPA. Unfortunately, the item before us today is also lacking, and so I do not have sufficient confidence that the allegations are correct. Let me explain some of my problems. While the Commission's desire to attack illegal robocalling is admirable, in this item it seeks to punish a technology and its operator rather than actual originators of alleged illegal robocalls, the companies that use the platform to contact consumers. Did the Commission actually seek enforcement action against the companies or individuals that directly made the alleged illegal robocalls? The item doesn't tell us, but the NAL response suggests it did not. Instead, the Commission attempts to deem the platform operator as violating TCPA with little facts and questionable arguments. Overall, this seems like an extremely far stretch under the law and begins to look a lot like those that sue gun manufacturers whenever there's a horrible event. Moreover, it opens a huge can of worms given that this same platform technology can be used for completely legitimate purposes and often is. So the Commission is then forced to try to define what is a good use and what is an illegal use. And therein lies even a bigger problem. The TCPA applies to parties that make or initiate a call. But here, it's the actual callers who load the numbers to be dialed, execute the software, and push send. Is Microsoft liable if I were to use Windows 10 or Outlook to send a threatening email? Of course not. Therefore, the item focuses instead on whether Dialing Services is so involved in the making of the calls as to be deemed to have made them. In doing so, the Commission essentially establishes a three-pronged test on who is susceptible for being captured under this vague determination. It offers spoofing capability, is involved in creation of the call's content, and markets that it can reach a wide audience. But all of these features can be used to generate calls for legitimate purposes, a point the Commission completely concedes regarding spoofing. On the first point, the NAL response notes that while the software can transmit calling party numbers provided by clients, there has been no indication that any telephone number supplied by a client to Dialing Services is spoofed or inaccurate. Indeed, the Commission does not show that spoofing was present in this case, so that should be a completely irrelevant factor here. Yet the item asserts, without evidence, that Dialing Services knows that caller ID spoofing and blocking are likely to be used deceptively by its customers. Second, in terms of the content of the scripts, the Commission argues that Dialing Services actively assists its clients with creation and structure of messages, and that the messages would likely show that the calls are designed to target recipients who didn't consent to be called. However, the NAL response states that the company has no involvement in the creation of scripts and that all content is created by the clients. It reviews or edits messages only when necessary to prevent unlawful or fraudulent behavior by a client. The easiest way to resolve this point of contention would have been to contact the clients. It would also seem prudent to obtain copies of the messages rather than hypothesize about what might have been in them. But it appears that this basic due diligence did not occur. Third, is it possible that other platforms would market themselves to suggest that they can reach a wide audience? That would seem to be a no-brainer, as being able to conduct mass calling campaigns would be appropriate for legitimate robocallers as well. Thus, the Commission's new test on its face appears to be arbitrary and capricious. To go so far as to implicate the technology platform provider, there should have to be some demonstrable evidence of clear intent to violate TCPA, not just speculation about what a company might have done or might have known. This is certainly what I have been calling for as it relates to pirate radio broadcasting and the need to get those who aid and abet them, such as property owners or advertisers. Clear intent. Wasn't there one Dialing Services email or conversation from a former client to shed light on Dialing Services intent? Yet that seems too much to wish for, as the item doesn't prove intent, and even or even try, but it relies on the old willful standard. I'm sure that someone will say willful is the standard in the law, and I would agree. However, since the Commission has taken TCPA far outside the original bounds of the law or its intent, we should prove more than mere willfulness before further expanding the scope of the TCPA to cover platform liability. In addition, on its face, it appears that this particular company certainly tried to address potential exposure points, at least according to the data presented in the item. Specifically, paragraph 4 outlines the circumstances that led to the Commission to issue its 2013 citation. The company was alleged to have made 4.7 million illegal robocalls in a 3-month period. That's an average of a little more than 1.5 million per month. Yet, when the Commission staff reviewed the company's practices just months later, they found only 184 instances. While not perfect, from 1.4 million to 184, that equates to a 99.99% decrease in a short amount of time. In fact, the item explains later that Dialing Services did further work to scrub its calling list to show compliance, and there would have been 0 incidents since mid-2013, which makes you wonder, is the goal to get TCPA compliance or get enforcement victories? My knowledge of Dialing Services is limited to what is contained in the item and the NAL response, and I have no preconceived notions about whether they should be liable. My interest is in making sure that they receive full consideration of their arguments and the outcome is just. Unfortunately, the response was given short shrift, and I'm concerned about the outcome. Beyond the fate of this particular company, I worry more about the precedential value of this item. The Commission is fond of declaring that its enforcement actions stand as new guidelines which others will be judged. Thus, the guidance provided via this decision will affect other technology platforms that have struggled with the overbroad and bad TCPA decisions recently made by the Commission. I think of Rob Sweeney of Mobile Media Technologies, who testified before House Judiciary Subcommittee in June. Mr. Sweeney stated that his business, which allows customers like television stations, newspapers, schools, local governments, hospitals, hotels, and not-for-profit organizations to send non-commercial text messages to their opt-in patrons, has had to face huge legal bills, downsizing, and even customer uncertainty because of TCPA actions and inactions by the Commission. How does today's action affect Mr. Sweeney's business? The forfeitures order vague standard that there may be instances in which a platform provider serves merely as a conduit for robocalls probably doesn't help Mr. Sweeney keep his clients or grow his business. For the previous reasons, I vote no. I thank the Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. This FCC has made consumers' top priority. Stopping unlawful robocalls, one of the agency's top priorities. We are taking steps to allow voice providers to block spoofed phone calls. We are exploring ways to make sure that calls can be authenticated. Last month, as Commissioner Clyburn pointed out, we proposed the largest fine in FCC history, $120 million, against an individual who apparently unleashed almost 100 million robocalls on American consumers in just 3 months. And today we impose a $2.88 million fine against Dialing Services for its willful and repeated violations of the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or TCPA. Here's why we are imposing this fine. An investigation by our Enforcement Bureau found that Dialing Services was responsible for more than 4.7 million robocalls to cell phones in just 3 months, all without prior express consent. Then, after Dialing Services was issued a citation, staff found in a follow-up investigation that it was responsible for yet more unauthorized robocalls to cell phones. Dialing Services offers a software-based robocalling service to third-party clients. But make no mistake, although it may not have physically placed the calls itself, Dialing Services was not the unwitting conduit or passive technical support service that it claims to be. Indeed, one of the company's featured services is a spoofing functionality that is designed to provide deceptive information about a call's originating point or to hide that information altogether. But even more significant, the company directly assists its clients in crafting and structuring their messages to help them conceal their true intentions, all for one purpose: to maximize the effectiveness of the illegal robocall campaigns that Dialing Services helps facilitate. This is not the conduct of a merely passive actor. No, these are the actions of a company that are so involved, in FCC parlance, in the making of the illegal calls that it can itself be deemed to be the maker or the initiator of the calls for purposes of liability under the TCPA. This substantial forfeiture order is the latest step that we have taken to stop the scourge of illegal robocalls, but it will not be the last. I want to thank my colleague, Commissioner Clyburn, for her input on and support of this item. I also want to thank the staff who worked so hard to bring this order to fruition: Michael Karowitz, Lloyd Collier, Lisa Gelb, Rosemary Harold, Richard Hinman, Michael Jansen, Michael Scirato, and Christy Thompson from the Enforcement Bureau. Christy being my compadre who started with me at the FCC 10 years ago this very week. Rick Mallon from the Office of General Counsel, and John B. Adams, Kurt Schroeder, Mark Stone, and Christy Thornton from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. It has been a long time coming, but your work has given voice to millions of American consumers who have been spammed by these illegal robocalls. With that, we will move to a vote on the item. We already voted. What am I saying? So we're done. Thank you to the Enforcement Bureau and to my colleagues for your statements. Old habits die hard. Would any of my colleagues like to make any announcements at this time?
I just have one. I wanted to. I had a little car trouble this week. My truck turned into a heavy paperweight, and I want to thank the safety personnel and security personnel of the agency and the garage attendants for their help and expediting my truck's removal and getting it towards repair. So I want to thank them for their assistance in that process.
So repair, not replace, huh?
She went there. Man.
We can always put your little car in my bag.
I know. We've got
She's
this
got the
so
nicest
bad
one of the three, I would say. I just have one very brief staff announcement, which is that we had a new addition to the office of the chairman, thanks to Dr. Jay Schwartz, our wireline advisor. Jay and his wife, Mary, had a daughter on June 25th, Rosamond Louise, who was 7 pounds, 5 ounces. She's doing very well. She's gaining weight, and soon, I hope, she'll be available for us in the office to see and to play with. And we're really excited for Jay and his family and look forward to seeing him and the entire family back in the swing of things. With that, if no one else has any further announcements, Madam Secretary, could you please announce the date of the next FCC agenda meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, August 3rd, 2017.
Then we stand adjourned.
Okay, we'll start the press conference.
Hey, everybody. Happy summer. Just have a brief I just have a brief statement, then happy to get your questions. With today's action at the FCC, relief from robocalls is getting closer for American consumers. As has been noted before from this dais, including today, robocalls represent the number one category of consumer complaints to the FCC. Americans are sending a clear message when it comes to unwanted robocalls. They are mad as hell, and they're not going to take it anymore, as Peter Finch memorably said in Network. And the FCC is hearing them and taking action. Moments ago, we also agreed to explore new methods to authenticate telephone calls. A call authentication framework would help us deal with the growing problem of malicious callers who hide their originating phone number. And that is because positively identifying bad actors can help strengthen call blocking and filtering tools. In addition, we voted to take on the problem of robocalls made to reassigned phone numbers. And these measures build on our decision in March to give voice providers greater leeway to block spoofed phone calls, as well as last month's proposed $120 million fine against the apparent perpetrator of a robocall spoofing operation. Now, as today's packed meeting for what we've dubbed Consumer Protection Month makes clear, attacking illegal robocalls is a major pro-consumer priority for this FCC. But it's hardly the only one. Today we also voted on a proposal to crack down on improper changes to consumers' phone accounts and unauthorized charges on consumers' phone bills, practices commonly known as slamming and cramming. And, of course, protecting consumers goes beyond fighting illicit schemes. We just proposed to strengthen our rural call completion requirements to make sure rural phone subscribers get what they pay for. We also voted to allocate more spectrum for vehicular radars, which we hope will help drivers stay safe on the road. These and other measures demonstrate that the public interest is first and foremost on the minds of this commission, and we are grateful that in many of these cases we're making substantial advancements very early on in the process. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Lynn, why don't you start? Lynn Stanton, TR Daily.
Hello.
Hi. Speaking of consumers, yesterday was day of action on something about the internet. And some of the pushback, if you will, from parties who support your idea of rolling back Title II classification was that the FCC should not be counting noses, should not be engaged in a plebiscite-type activity or a survey of consumers. This in response to the idea that lots and lots of consumers were going to weigh in and file their comments about this issue. Shouldn't the number of consumers who feel that they are detrimentally affected be a factor in cost-benefit analysis of what you do?
Well, look, I've consistently said on this issue that, as with any issue, at the conclusion of the period for public comment, the agency will take a look at the facts in the record and make an evaluation based on those facts as well as the applicable law and make the appropriate judgment. And that is the course that we are going to follow in this proceeding.
But just more in general, not just this proceeding in general, but just broadly, does that sort of number factor come into play in sort of making a judgment call as to the costs on one side and the benefits on the other?
Well, again, as I've said again previously, the raw number is not as important as the substantive comments that are in the record. We want to weigh all comments and make sure that we take a full view of the record and, again, make the appropriate judgment based on those facts and the law as it applies.
Thank you.
Lydia. Hi.
Hi, Lydia Bayud, Event Driven News. Mr. Chairman, you have been very focused on rural broadband during your tenure. Earlier this week, Microsoft made a big pitch to bring high-speed broadband to rural America, but to do that, they want you to authorize white space devices in the broadcast band. So you previously dissented from the way the prior administration crafted those proposed rules. What are your thoughts about Microsoft's announcement, and what do you plan to do about the vacant channel proceeding?
Well, we are still early on in the consideration of that new proposal, which was just announced, and that's part of the reason why on Tuesday I traveled to South Boston, Virginia, a small town in the mountains of the Shenandoahs, where I visited with, among others, Microsoft, Mid-Atlantic Broadband, and most significantly to me anyway, Gwen and Dylan Harris. Dylan is a recent high school graduate, and Gwen is his mom. And I heard from him how it was helpful to have broadband provided over these devices in order to do his homework and ultimately to lead him to develop a love for computer science, which he's going to be studying this August at Old Dominion University. And to me, it was important to hear firsthand from Microsoft about some of the aspects of their proposal and from somebody who had actually used that service to see what the potential was. And going forward, we want to engage in a robust dialogue with all stakeholders to figure out what the appropriate way forward should be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick follow-up to Lynn's question. What contact did you or your office have with the major internet companies participating in yesterday's protest about their participation either before or yesterday?
In terms of, sorry, I'm missing.
What conversations did you have with them, if there were any, about their participation and their activism around net neutrality in general?
None that I know. I certainly didn't.
Did anyone in your office?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, John Hendel with Politico. Just wanted to quickly check in about kind of behind the scenes how ECFS held up yesterday and like this week in general, given there's been a lot of comments coming in. Didn't seem to be any issues, but didn't know, what you guys encountered.
That is a sense I get. I will offer the caveat that I've been on the road the past few days, so I haven't gotten an in-depth briefing, but my understanding, based on how things have gone over the last 24 hours in particular, is that the system held up pretty well. We are at, I believe, somewhat over 7 million comments or so, with a great number of those filed in the last day or two, and so I think things look pretty good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Chairman. David Hatch with Deal Reporter. Do you support Commissioner O'Reilly's proposal that he made just now about no longer referring merger reviews to ALJs and just having an up or down vote? And if so, if you could explain why, if you either support that or don't.
Well, I think the critical words in your question were just now. He just announced it, so I haven't had a chance to think about it, but I'll certainly give it due consideration. And as you've seen over the last several months, when any of my colleagues have a constructive proposal for changing how the agency does business, either administratively or substantively, I want to have an open door and an open mind to those questions. And so I'll certainly give it my attention.
Matt?
Hi.
Communications Daily, on the respond to something Mike O'Reilly tip. During his comments, he referenced a desire to see further rulemaking on TCPA-related issues, reference to the 15 order. I'm curious where you see the likelihood of that is and what things you'd like to see addressed. Where would this go potentially?
Unfortunately, that's the answer I have to give is it's very preliminary, and we're obviously waiting on a decision from the D.C. Circuit on the TCPA case involving the 2015 order. So I can't say at this point what any prospective order that might involve that decision would be or when it would be issued.
But any prospective order would be predicated on the D.C. Circuit opinion. There wouldn't be anything independent thereof.
Well, that would be a pretty substantial factor in guiding our determinations, depending on how the court construes various parts of the statute.
Shepardson from Reuters. Two questions. One on robocalls. You've obviously dealt with this, the Commission, for a long time. Do you think any of these actions are going to make a significant dent in the 2 to 2.5 billion robocalls a month that consumers are getting?
Absolutely, I do. I think both with respect to the preemptive, if you will, rules that we are trying to establish, things like the call authentication framework, for instance, could be a very powerful tool. If consumers can have the confidence when they pick up the phone that the person whose caller ID information is showing up on their phone is in fact that person, that would be significant. If we can set up a do not originate a system that would allow consumers to tell their carriers, look, we don't want our number to be used by anyone else except by me, that would be pretty significant. On the back end, the post-Hawk side of things, if you will, by taking aggressive enforcement action, including dialing services case today, the Abramovich case last month, we are sending a signal, I think, that the FCC is a very aggressive cop on the beat. And so now the fact that consumers have made this the number one category of complaints to the Commission is matched by an agency that makes it the top, I would argue, enforcement priority as well. And so I think all of these things combined suggest to unscrupulous actors as well as consumers that we are going to take action. And this is one of the things I find that unites people. Whenever I do meetings, including this past week in West Virginia and Maryland, that's one of the things that people nod their heads about when you say, the robocalls, it just never stops. And I'm always amazed that this is sort of the universal language now. We all just want to get rid of this scourge.
And based on the volume of comments on the Title II proceeding, what are you seeing as a timeline for taking a final action? I mean, given the volume, do you expect to take more time before bringing this to a final vote?
We haven't made any time frame, and the public comment period is obviously still open, and so we're not going to make any determinations about what the time frame after that might be.
Okay, great. Hi. On Sinclair, when it's talking about its merger with Tribune, it talks about how it needs to get bigger in order to survive. So kind of looking more broadly, when you look at the broadcast industry, do you agree or do you think that argument carries weight that broadcasters maybe need to get bigger than 39% would allow them to compete with media companies?
Again, this is an issue that's very, very preliminary. I mean, the companies just filed their papers with the Commission. The Commission just put out a public notice inviting comment on a variety of issues. And so I can't prejudge at this early date any of the substantive issues that are at stake in that transaction.
Any from the table?
Yes, please. Thank you. Hi, Mr. Chairman.
Hi.
Todd Shields,
Nice to hear
Bloomberg
you,
News. Hi. Thank you. Could you say why you voted to overturn the ALJ in the Cablevision appeal? Thank you.
Because I believe that the Office of General Counsel ably analyzed the facts and took a look at the applicable law and made a determination that this disposition was consistent with the facts in the law and would I guess I can't put it any better than that. I relied on the staff's judgment, which was extremely thoughtful.
Hey, Marian Bax from Morning Consult. Lawmakers are in pretty much a wide agreement about the need to standardize broadband coverage maps to more accurately disperse universal service funds. I know it's something that is important to you. What role do you see the the Universal Service Fund Administration Company playing, if any, in doing that, or how do you plan to standardize broadband coverage maps?
That's a great question, and that's something that, as you pointed out, we have heard about from both sides of the aisle in both chambers of Congress. We want to make sure, as the steward of scarce federal dollars through the Universal Service Fund, that every dollar that we expend is going to an area that needs that subsidy in order to provide service, and that in turn requires us to have accurate data. And so going forward, we are looking forward to working with all stakeholders, including members of Congress and companies that are involved in providing service in those areas, to make sure that we have the most accurate data possible. And I would imagine that the Universal Service Administrative Company, which of course administers this program on our behalf, under our oversight, will be a part of that process.
Anything further? Thank you very much.
Oh, I think we have one person. Sorry.
I forgot my question and then I remembered it.
I do not watch My Little Pony voluntarily, if that's the answer.
That was
I'm
not
no
my question, Mr. Chairman. Tara Jeffries, Bloomberg BNA.
Yeah.
Commissioner O'Reilly made a remark when he dissented on the dialing services enforcement that he questioned whether the goal of such actions was TCPA compliance or, as he put it, Enforcement Bureau victories. Do you see that? I mean, you obviously voted yes on the action, but more broadly, do you see that as an ongoing problem?
I don't, and I think in this particular case, we have a $2.88 million forfeiture order. And as you might recall, one of my concerns about the enforcement actions in the previous FCC was that we issued a number of notices of apparent liability that didn't proceed to that final step. That final step is where the rubber meets the road in terms of vindication of the consumer's interests. Because if we're not actually imposing the fine, then we can't collect. If we can't collect, then there's no essential deterrence or punishment factor to our enforcement regime. And so in that case, as well as the Abramovich case, I think we're sending a signal that based on the facts as best we can discern them, and based on the law as we reasonably read it, we are going to take aggressive action to protect the public interest. And in robocalls as well as other areas, that is going to be the consistent theme you'll see, I think, from our enforcement approach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
What's your problem with the brony?
I was just kidding. No, it's only because my kids love My Little Pony, and so we're just watching it now when I find myself sort of, just a catchy introductory tune in so anyway, you're late at night, you put the kids to bed, and all of a sudden you hear this in the back of your mind, and you can hear the theme song, and that's when you recognize, Houston, we have a problem, and so you just got to disassociate yourself. But anyway, how times change, as those of you who are parents know.
For the Bureau press conferences, we're going to just have both CGB and Wireline up here on the robocall items. If there's questions on those, are there any questions on those? Okay. How about on rural call completion? Okay. Media Bureau video, that was voted. Video description was voted. OET's item on radio frequency equipment, that's number 6. Okay. OET on radar services in the 76 gigahertz band.
I have one technical question on that.
Okay. OET.
Thanks, everybody. Dave Shepardson from Reuters. Just one, the auto companies made a request that they're going to exit the 24 spectrum in 2022, but they wanted approval to be able to fix existing cars on the road. How did you address that?
So you'll see when the item is released, there's some provisions that would accommodate things like repairs of equipment. So we did take that into account in the final item.
So you will be able to, if you have one of these systems after 2022, you can still use the system.
Their issue wasn't about use, because if it's already deployed, obviously the radars can continue to be used, but it was about what happens if your radar breaks 3 years from now,
Right.
and they have a supply of equipment so that it can be repaired.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Whether they're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we provided, so if it breaks, it can be fixed.
Okay, great.
Thanks. Let's see, another OET item on Part 15, unlicensed. Okay. Game Show Network, OGC? Yes, we... Oh, I'm sorry, that is wireless mic, right? All right. Sorry. Would you like wireless mics? Okay, all right. All right, sorry.
Make. So he thinks that it's unclear from the news release and the commissioner statements whether there were changes made from the draft item, and he would like to know whether changes were made to the proposal in the draft further notice, and if so, what were they?
Yeah, so we hope to release the item soon, and there were some additional questions that were added to the item. And we'll have to wait till it's released.
And that's all you're going to tell us right now?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, and it looks like there was some interest in the Game Show Network. Yes, okay, so if OGC can come up. Bill? Go ahead, Matt.
Daily, this will be addressed, I'm sure, when it comes out, but can you walk us through a little bit of the thought process of reversing the LJ decision, what exactly OGC was looking at and how it came to these conclusions, basically the nuts and bolts of this kind of reversal of opinion?
I can't really go into any detail about it. The order should be out shortly, but at a high level, the Commission did not disagree with the factual findings of the ALJ, but more with the conclusions of law.
How much deference generally is given to ALJ on these kinds of decisions by OGC?
So these decisions and hearings, that go up to the Commission have been around for a long time. There's the legal standard of review is de novo, and so the whole record is available to the Commission, but there is deference on witness credibility.
Could I just follow up? So when a proceeding is referred to an ALJ, who makes that decision? Is that made by the chairman's office? Is that made by all the commissioners? How is that done?
So with a program carriage complaint, and I think it varies by the type of complaint.
Specific about a merger, since that came up today at today's meeting. But that and other proceedings, including program carriage complaints.
Sure. As to this particular item.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of how something can get referred to an ALJ, whether it's a merger or another proceeding.
Yeah,
who makes the referral?
We'll get back. David, can we get back to you?
Sure.
On that? Okay,
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, Margaret.
Margaret McGill with Politico. I just wanted to make sure when in reversing this means Cablevision doesn't have to pay the fine and they're not required to carry Game Show Network on that expanded basic tier. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on this? Okay, thank you. And then enforcement. Anything on the enforcement item? Okay, I think we're done. Thank you so much.
Nothing new.
Oh, no, I just checked to see, am I up next? Yes. All right, there we go. Does anyone have a question that I can be helpful on? Anyone? Start with you.
Commissioner, if you could expand on the comment that you made about your proposal not to have mergers referred to ALJs. Why are you putting forward that idea? And also, if you could just help me understand, how do mergers get referred to ALJs? Who makes that decision?
Well, I'll let the process, they're going to follow up on the process for you on the ALJ. But in terms of the first part, I think I might have mentioned to you yesterday, I don't agree with the idea that we would that we do and have in the past, threatened to send something to the ALJ for purposes of responding to an application for by companies to potentially merge or transfer the licenses. I don't agree with that. I just of the opinion and have had it for quite a long while that we should just make the decision, vote up or down. DOJ makes a decision up or down. It's not this. We'll send it to an ALJ. It's a cop out. We send it to ALJ, knowing that it will never get out of there. And therefore the companies crumble in the meantime, and therefore wind up withdrawing the petitions and the applications before us. So it's a backwards way of killing a merger, and I don't think that's appropriate. I think we should just make a decision, and whatever the decision is, then so be it.
Mentioned recommendations you've made to Congress, I think, about reforming the ALJ process.
I was saying I think we should work with our congressional overseers on the first part, which was what's the scope of that we refer to them, and then whether we even need the ALJ anymore. Not him himself, but the ALJ process. I think we've proven that we're having to deal with these anyway. So if we're having to vote on them anyway, why don't we just skip out the middleman?
Can the FCC stop referring mergers to ALJs on its own, or do you need an act of Congress?
I think we could do that. We don't have to refer the applications to the ALJ under our process. I'm happy to double check on that point, but I'm pretty sure we can just vote up and down on the application before us. There's kind of two different things. I was talking about the first part compared to the second part.
Do you see any role for the ALJ at the FCC then?
I'm having a less and less role for one. I think we should look at whether we should either eliminate or certainly significantly decrease their role, not reflecting the personality of it's not a personal matter. Any questions I can be of help? Well, I've stumped you all so early. That's okay. Have a good day. Anyone else, before I leave the podium, has a question for me? All right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure if there are any questions, but if there are at this time, I'd be happy to entertain any. If not, I can go get my car repaired because it's making a funny noise. Okay.
Please. Commissioner, has the FCC had any informal contact with the DOJ with regard to the review of the AT&T Time Warner merger? I know that the FCC is not formally involved. Has there been any dialogue on an informal basis with the DOJ?
I am not aware of any.
Do you anticipate that the DOJ might reach out in that capacity?
From what I understand in my years here, that has not been uncommon for them to reach out and have contact with their fellow agency their sister or brother agencies, depending on how you want to phrase that. And so it would not be surprising to me that if they have not done so with us being an expert agency, that they might.
Mm-hmm. I was also wondering if you have an opinion on this issue that's come up today about referrals of mergers by the FCC to ALJs. Do you see that as something that you would want to retain, or do you also have some issues with that?
So again, the issue came up in terms of referrals, of that short-circuiting the traditional process and going straight to ALJ. I'm sorry, because I did not benefit from...
Well, because Commissioner O'Reilly, when he was discussing...
the current structure and the timing and the
he was discussing one of the items, but he made a broader statement about that he doesn't think that merger review should be referred by the FCC to administrative law judges. I'm just wondering, do you have an opinion on that?
One of the things that I have, been, excited about when it comes to this agency and our process and how we do what we do is more than one prong. The three of us right now and 5 at full complement and staff as hard as we try, there are some dynamics and things that we might not organically, singularly see. And so, a process that is all-inclusive, that, recognizes where the lanes are and where the strengths are. I think there's no process that is perfect, but there are some that are more perfect than others. And if you go around this world and look at what the gold standard is, people look at this agency and the layers and the complements that it has within and what it does, with your previous question, how we will work with other entities where either there's shades of gray or there needs to be a leaning on, so to speak, in terms of expertise. I think those things are positive, and it makes for a better delivery of orders, decisions, and policy making.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Be fair, because I asked this of Commissioner O'Reilly yesterday and Chairman Pai today, regarding the day of action and some of the pushback from opponents of Title II in particular, that the FCC should not be about counting noses, that the number of consumers who file on this issue should not be a factor to be weighed. Mm-hmm. What is your view on the number of people who are concerned enough to file in terms of doing a cost-benefit analysis of how it affects individuals?
Well, let me answer what I perceive as being the basis of your, when you started with your compound question. You and I have that, seem to have that experience with each other, but I do appreciate it. And I will say that to ignore the voices of individuals who take the time in their own way to express their feelings about something that is so critical as an open internet, and what this agency is doing to either facilitate that or to hamper that. I think that's short-sighted. There is a reason why people have a low opinion of government and government employees, because they think that they ignore what they say. And if you double down on that and saying, up to almost 7 million commenters, and then you, have state that someone's submission needs to look one way or another, not everyone is as comfortable or is created equal, or they don't have access to a law library. So to discount what is substantial or significant, and to say because it doesn't fit a certain template, it is irrelevant, I think that is problematic. We have asked people to weigh in. We have multiple sources. You can file, you can call, you can write, and we seek. We say we seek, opinion. We say we are a reflection of the will of the people, and we have the people's best interests at heart. You do not do that in a vacuum by ignoring the voices of people.
Thank you.
I have one more question on another matter. So on the CenturyLink Level 3 deal, do you expect that will be handled on delegated authority? And would you prefer to see that voted at the full commission level? Do you have an opinion on that?
I don't have an express opinion at that time, but I will attempt to, voice, because you have heard me say, express opinion on one or two, potential, mergers that I think warrant FCC review, particularly if we know full well that it would potentially recalibrate, the marketplace. So while I won't single out that particular one, I am generally in favor if an application or is significant for this agency to look over and to see whether or not it would have a positive or negative effects in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Shepherdson from Reuters. Can I ask, with the next week's confirmation hearing coming, are your plans to remain on the commission until another commissioner is confirmed, or would you remain until another person is nominated?
So I don't plan to make a news prior to that hearing. I wish them the very best. They're capable individuals at their known quantities. And I will just leave that at that. I don't have any news to make. I don't have any announcements to make. Other than to say it continues to be a privilege to serve. I continue to be supportive and a voice for those who have been historically ignored. And I think that's the role I play, and I continue to do so.
Okay, thanks.
Margaret McGill with Politico. I have two questions for you. First, on Sinclair, it's similar to what I asked the chairman. They talk about getting bigger, necessary to just survive in this environment. Do you think that's the case in the broadcast industry? TV stations need to consolidate in order to stay competitive?
Now, full disclosure, I majored in banking and finance and economics, and we talked about synergies and economies of scale and scope and the like. And I don't discount basic economic principles, but what I do have a problem is with a discount that is now back into effect that would. In effect, that does not give a clear picture of what anything, any transaction, particularly one that you noted that I was unaware of until I, was informed by you with a particular a transaction that was handled internally. Look, I believe that first and foremost, transparency. And the ability for us to weigh in a fair and open way should always be the objective. And so I can't tell you what the thresholds are or where that sweet spot is and the like. But we have the obligation to make sure that each and every transaction is in the public interest. And the chairman has said over and over again how he was going to differentiate himself in terms of being transparent. And with this particular item, I said it when it was discovered in the trade, that, I had to, if I were attempting to look for it, I had to go to our website, then I had to click the media tab, and then I had to look for something called Bluestone license holding, and then I had to click on that to see what was going on. That's problematic. So transparency and the ability to review, a set number or no transaction is created equal. No, ecosystem is the same. No holding company is the same. So I'm not attempting to project that we should be rigid in terms of that, or there is a number or a threshold, whether it's 100 or whatever the number is. I do say that we need to have a clear picture, and that to me is the friction that I find here.
One more on the Game Show Network decision. Sorry, guys.
On the what decision?
On the Game Show Network.
Okay.
From your statement, do you disagree with the agency overturning the administrative law judge, or do you also think that Game Show Network was discriminated against based on its non-affiliation?
So I'm not going on the latter. I will not weigh in. On the former, We have a process in place that I heard my colleagues, taking issue with the amount of time that it took. I'm not going to argue with that. But we did not have the benefit, the Enforcement Bureau, nor the three of us had the benefit of going through those hours, those thousands of papers, those 12 witnesses. We created this structure. The administrative law judge structure was created because all of us knew, or our predecessors knew, that there are some questions and issues that needed more granularity, that needed more attention, and that we should respect that process. And for us, to overturn that and delve into statements of fact as opposed to staying in our lane, I believe is problematic. Well, if nothing's further, I'm going to get my VW serviced. And I look forward to speaking with you on or before August 3rd. Thank you.